The morning it all started, I was sipping coffee on my porch watching the neighborhood dogs chase a squirrel like it owed them money when Karen marched up my driveway like she was delivering divine judgment. You could practically hear her heels puncturing the pavement. Her lips were pursed, clipboard clutched, HOA badge glinting in the sun like a sheriff's star she'd awarded herself. She didn't even bother with a greeting, just jabbed a finger toward my freshly installed gate and announced, "This violates our community's open aesthetic." Now, my gate wasn't anything wild. Just a black, motorized iron gate I'd built myself, a sturdy but clean design that matched my fence perfectly. It opened with a keypad and remote, smooth and quiet, meant purely for security. After 2 packages vanished and someone rifled through my truck at night, I figured a gate was common sense. But in Karen's world, logic was optional. The HOA requires unobstructed visual flow, she continued like she'd swallowed a thesaurus. You'll need to remove it immediately. I stayed calm, mostly because I've learned that arguing with Karen is like arguing with gravity. You just end up tired. Karen, I said, this gate is on my property line. It's been approved by the city permit office. The HOA guidelines don't mention security gates. Her eyes lit up like I'd just challenged her to mortal combat. That's because nobody's ever been inconsiderate enough to install one, she said. It sets a terrible precedent. We don't need people feeling unsafe. That sends the wrong message about our community. I almost laughed. Feeling unsafe? I was the one who found muddy boot prints by my truck last month. But Karen's logic was consistent in one way. It always revolved around control. She strutted off after threatening to bring this up at the next board meeting. That night, I checked my security camera footage. Karen hadn't even left my driveway before snapping photos from 3 angles. The next morning, I had an official-looking notice of violation taped to my mailbox with her sloppy signature. Apparently, the unsanctioned gate disrupted architectural harmony. I knew she'd printed it herself. The HOA templates didn't use Comic Sans. I spent the rest of the day in my workshop, where I keep everything from welding gear to bad ideas. The gate had taken me a week to build, and I wasn't about to let it go without a fight. I decided to get ahead of her nonsense. That evening, I called the city's zoning office, double-checked every permit, and even printed out the HOA's bylaws. No mention of security gates. No restrictions on private driveway enclosures. 2 days later, I attended the HOA meeting, mostly for the entertainment. Karen sat at the head of the long folding table, posture so rigid it looked like her spine had been replaced with rebar. Around her were the usual board members. Dave, who never spoke but always nodded like a bobblehead, Ellen, who only cared about lawn height, and Mark, who tried to stay out of it because his brother sold me the steel for the gate. Karen banged her little wooden gavel. Yes, she actually brought one, and started the meeting with new business, Mr. Reed's unauthorized security gate. She glanced at me like she was addressing a criminal. I just smiled and opened my folder. Her speech went on for 10 minutes about community image and property values. I waited patiently, then slid the printed HOA bylaws across the table. Section 4, Paragraph 3, I said. Homeowners are permitted to install fences, gates, and barriers within their lot boundaries, provided they meet city code. Karen frowned, scanning the page like it was written in alien symbols. That clause refers to decorative fencing, she said weakly. Then my gate's decorative, I said. I think it looks pretty. A few chuckles rippled around the table. She shot daggers at them. Then she leaned forward and hissed, "Fine. If you want to be difficult, we'll take this up with the Architectural Review Committee." I almost felt bad for her. That committee was 3 retirees who met once a year to approve Christmas lights and mailbox paint. I left the meeting knowing she'd double down, and I wasn't wrong. The following week, she started her campaign, flyers in mailboxes about unauthorized structures, emails accusing me of setting a tone of division, and even a passive-aggressive post on the community Facebook group. Some residents don't understand that security comes from trust, not barriers. The comments section roasted her alive. One neighbor posted, "Tell that to the guy who broke into my garage last spring." Another added a photo of his ring cam showing a prowler. Karen tried to spin it, "That's an isolated incident." But the thread kept growing. That's when she escalated. One morning, I found her standing by my gate with a tape measure. "I'm documenting," she said curtly. "You're exceeding the permissible height limit." "It's 4 feet, I said. 4.5, she snapped. "That's a violation." She wasn't wrong. It was 54 inches because I'd built it on a slight incline. But the rule only applied to front yard fences, not driveway gate. Still, I knew she'd twist it. By that evening, she'd filed an official complaint with the HOA's compliance officer, who happened to be her cousin. The letter I got demanded I reduce or remove the gate within 10 days or face a $500 fine. That was the moment I realized I'd been fighting her on her turf, the HOA, and that was her kingdom. Time to move the battle somewhere else. I called an old friend, Sheriff Dalton. We'd gone to high school together, and he owed me a favor after I welded the steel kennel doors for the department's K-9 unit last year. I explained the situation, half joking that maybe I should donate my gate to him before Karen forced me to tear it down. He chuckled and said, "You know, our substation out by Route 9 could use one." That idea clicked instantly. I told him, "Give me a week." Meanwhile, Karen wasn't slowing down. She started patrolling the neighborhood like a security guard with a personal vendetta. I caught her photographing the gate again, muttering something about aesthetics and neighborhood cohesion. She even tried to corner my wife at the mailbox, claiming our property's fortress-like appearance was scaring new buyers. My wife, bless her, just smiled and said, "Good. Keeps the weirdos out." That night, I decided to end this game my way. I spent the next few evenings rewiring the gate, welding detachable brackets, and adding fresh paint to make it look pristine. Karen must have thought I was giving up, because 2 days later, she posted triumphantly online that compliance has been achieved. I didn't correct her. A week later, on a bright Saturday morning, a flatbed truck from the sheriff's department pulled up in front of my driveway. Dalton himself hopped out, laughing. "You weren't kidding," he said, eyeing the gate. "This thing's nicer than what we've got at the station." Neighbors started peeking from porches as we unbolted the gate and loaded it onto the truck. Karen appeared halfway through, in full meltdown mode, shrieking, "What are you doing?" I said calmly, "Oh, I'm complying. The HOA didn't want a security gate on my property, so I donated it to the sheriff's office. They'll install it right next to their logo. Very aesthetic." The silence that followed was delicious. Karen's jaw dropped. You can't just." "I already did," I said. "Tax deductible, too." Dalton tipped his hat and added, "Appreciate your contribution to community safety, sir." And that's how my unauthorized gate ended up guarding the sheriff's parking lot instead of my driveway. But the real fun, oh, that was just beginning. Karen didn't speak to me for 3 whole days after the gate donation incident, which I later realized was the HOA equivalent of DEFCON 2. Then, right on schedule, the storm came. I woke up Monday morning to find a thick envelope in my mailbox stamped with the HOA logo like it was an arrest warrant. Inside was a 6-page notice of noncompliance, listing everything from improper driveway finish to unapproved lighting fixtures. She'd even cited me for garage clutter visible when door is open. The woman had weaponized bureaucracy. I stood there in the sunlight flipping through her invented violations and laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. My wife, Lena, peered over my shoulder. "Is she serious? Half these rules don't even exist." "She's serious about control," I said. "It's her version of cardio." The list was absurd. Remove decorative stones, repaint mailbox post, trim hedge below 24 inches. But what caught my attention was the final line. Failure to comply may result in property lien per HOA bylaws. That was her endgame, force me to bend or bleed money. I could almost respect the dedication. Almost. That night I attended the emergency HOA meeting she'd conveniently scheduled to address multiple community concerns. Multiple meaning one man. When I walked in, everyone already looked uncomfortable. Karen sat at the front, gavel in hand, tapping it like a metronome of irritation. Mr. Reed, she began with exaggerated civility, we've received numerous complaints about your property's nonconformity. From whom? I asked. That's confidential. So, you mean you? The room snickered. She shot a glare that could melt chrome. We're here to preserve the neighborhood's character. Your recent activities, construction noise, unauthorized gate, non-standard lighting, undermine that goal. My construction noise? I said. That was me uninstalling the gate you said was unauthorized. As for lighting, they're solar path lights. Walmart sells them in 10-packs. Karen folded her arms. Regardless, we've determined your property must undergo compliance inspection next week. I leaned back. By whom? The HOA Compliance Committee, she said triumphantly. I'll be attending personally. Translation: she was bringing her clipboard army to invade my yard. I smiled politely. Fine. But I want everything documented in writing. She hesitated. Why? Because you tend to improvise. Her nostrils flared. Fine. You'll get it in writing. And she did. The next morning, a typed letter arrived scheduling a comprehensive property assessment for Thursday. I spent the next 2 days preparing, not to pass inspection, but to make sure everything she'd nitpicked was airtight. I measured hedge height with a level, repainted the mailbox, and pressure-washed the driveway until it looked like new concrete. If she wanted a war of precision, I'd give her one measured in millimeters. Thursday afternoon arrived bright and hot. Karen strutted up the street in full command mode, clipboard under arm, 2 HOA cronies trailing like ducklings. She wore a sun hat big enough to block satellites. We're here to perform your compliance inspection, she declared like she'd been deputized by the Supreme Court. Go right ahead, I said, stepping aside. They fanned out like forensic investigators. One man crouched by the hedge with a tape measure. Karen clicked photos of my porch from 3 angles. At one point she crouched to inspect a sprinkler head, muttering something about drainage aesthetics. I kept my poker face, though inside I was dying to laugh. After an hour of fruitless searching, Karen scribbled furiously on her clipboard. We'll issue our findings shortly, she said stiffly. Take your time, I said. Accuracy is important. By evening, she'd hand-delivered the report herself, 3 pages long, stamped with HOA letterhead and her dramatic signature. It accused me of reflective surface violations because my windows produced glare visible from the street. I stared at the paper in disbelief. She was now blaming me for sunlight. Lena leaned against the counter reading over my shoulder. So, what, we're supposed to tint the sun? I grinned. Oh no. We're going to document everything. That night I wrote a detailed letter to the HOA board excluding Karen. I attached photos of every so-called violation and pointed out the lack of legal foundation for her complaint. I also CC'd the city's Community Relations Office and Zoning Department for good measure. If she wanted to bury me in paperwork, I'd dig her out with a forklift full of it. Days passed quietly, too quietly. I assumed she was licking her wounds. Then one morning, a white truck pulled up while I was mowing the lawn. 2 uniformed city inspectors stepped out. We got an anonymous complaint about unpermitted electrical work, one said, gesturing toward my house. Karen, naturally, watched from across the street with binoculars thinly disguised as sunglasses. Sure, I said, motioning them inside. Take a look. They inspected the gate's old wiring, the outlets in my garage, even the breaker box. Everything was up to code. When they finished, one of them muttered, "Looks fine to me. Whoever called this in must have too much time on their hands." I smiled. Oh, she does. When they left, I waved at Karen across the road. She turned on her heel and stormed back inside like a vampire who'd seen daylight. That evening, I decided to up the ante. I printed a photo of my old gate proudly installed at the sheriff's substation, complete with the department seal in the background. Then I slipped it into an envelope and dropped it in her mailbox with a short note. "Thanks for helping improve community safety. Now it protects the sheriff." By morning, her meltdown was audible. My neighbor Mark texted me. "Karen's on her lawn screaming into her phone. Something about legal counsel and property rights." Apparently, she'd tried to complain to the sheriff's department about unauthorized use of private design features. The dispatcher had reportedly laughed. "When Sheriff Dalton called me later," he said, "you've got half my deputies talking about that gate. We even named it Karen's Barrier." I nearly choked laughing. But her fury wasn't funny for long. A week later, I received a certified letter from an attorney representing the HOA, clearly Karen's idea, claiming I'd publicly defamed her by distributing photos mocking a board member. The letter demanded a written apology and retraction of defamatory materials. Lena read it twice before saying, "Is she suing you for giving something to law enforcement?" "Apparently," I said. I called Dalton again. He laughed so hard he wheezed. "Let me guess, she's claiming ownership of your old gate?" "Yup." "Well," he said, "that's easy. It's in our possession, documented as a public donation. I'll send her lawyer a statement myself." 2 days later, the HOA's attorney dropped the issue entirely. Word got around that the sheriff had called Karen personally and told her to find a new hobby. That should have been the end. But with Karen, endings were just intermissions. The next curveball came via the HOA's budget meeting. Normally those were boring affairs about landscaping costs and trash pickup. But Karen, still humiliated, proposed a brand new initiative: community security standards. It required every homeowner to register all exterior cameras, lighting, and gates for visual approval. Her pitch was transparent. "We must ensure consistency in our community's appearance," she said. "Security devices create an atmosphere of distrust." Mark leaned over to me and whispered, "Does she realize how nuts that sounds?" "She thinks she's writing policy for Buckingham Palace," I whispered back. When it came time to vote, I asked, "Will these standards apply to every board member equally?" Karen blinked. "Of course." I smiled. "Then you'll need to disclose your Ring doorbell and those floodlights you installed last month." Her face turned the color of spoiled tomato. "Those are safety necessities." "So is my gate," I said. The motion failed spectacularly, 12 votes against, 3 for. Even Ellen, her usual ally, abstained. Karen slammed her gavel so hard the handle cracked. Afterward, several neighbors came up to me laughing, saying they'd had enough of her nonsense. Someone even made a meme of Karen pointing at my old driveway with the caption, "When your HOA power trip backfires into a police partnership." By the next morning, half the neighborhood group chat had changed their profile pictures to that meme. Karen stopped leaving her house for a while, but I knew better than to relax. Her ego wasn't built for retreat. Sure enough, 2 weeks later she came back swinging, with a new strategy involving city permits, county records, and one very sneaky maneuver that nearly cost me my property tax discount. That, however, was when I decided to bring in reinforcements, because if Karen wanted a war on paper, I knew someone who could bury her in it legally and publicly. And that's how the HOA feud turned into a full-scale showdown that reached the county council. The letter from the county office arrived on a Tuesday morning, printed on thick, official-looking paper that smelled like bureaucracy and regret. I unfolded it over breakfast, half expecting another one of Karen's paper wars, and wasn't disappointed. Notice of property tax adjustment, it read, citing a possible misclassification of residential improvements. Translation: someone had reported that I'd made unpermitted structural modifications that could raise my property value, and thus my taxes. I didn't need Sherlock Holmes to figure out who the anonymous informant was. The only person obsessed enough with my property to weaponize the tax office was currently trimming her roses across the street with surgical precision. She waved at me like we were lifelong friends, eyes glittering with fake innocence. "Morning, Karen," I called. "How's the crusade?" She smiled sweetly. "Just making sure everything stays compliant." I wanted to ask if she meant compliant or conquered, but I was saving my energy. This was chess now, not checkers. I called the county assessor's office and asked for details. The clerk explained that they'd received a credible report of a large new structure, apparently my gate, being installed without proper valuation. When I told her it had been donated to law enforcement weeks ago, she chuckled. "Sounds like someone gave us old information," she said. "Send documentation and we'll clear it up." I faxed them proof the same afternoon, including a letter from Sheriff Dalton verifying the donation. But the situation gave me an idea. If Karen wanted to drag me into the realm of official paperwork, I could easily drag her there too. That night, I went through public record. Every HOA in our county had to register as a non-profit corporation, complete with annual filings. I found our association's registration, and guess what? The last board update was 3 years overdue. Technically, our HOA was operating under a lapsed filing. That meant every fine, every official letter Karen had sent, carried no legal standing. I stayed up past midnight reading bylaws, sipping coffee like it was ammunition. By morning I was ready. I called an old friend, Naomi, a real estate attorney who handled corporate compliance. I explained everything. She laughed for a full 30 seconds. "You're telling me your HOA president's been playing dictator while the organization technically doesn't exist?" "Yup." "Send me the paperwork," she said. "This is going to be fun." The next HOA meeting fell on a Thursday evening in the community clubhouse. The place buzzed with tension. Half the neighborhood was tired of Karen's antics, the other half too scared to cross her. I walked in carrying a manila folder so thick it could have been a thesis. Karen immediately launched into her speech. "It has come to our attention that certain residents are undermining community harmony by involving outside authorities in internal matters." Her voice trembled with self-righteous fury. "This behavior damages our image and could have legal consequences." I raised my hand. "Speaking of legal consequences." She froze mid-sentence. "I did some checking," I said, opening the folder. "According to the State Business Registry, this HOA hasn't filed its annual reports since 2022. That means it's not in good standing. In other words, Karen, none of your fines, letters, or complaints are legally enforceable." The room went dead quiet except for the air conditioner clicking on. Karen blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a malfunctioning robot. "That's ridiculous," she finally managed. "We're a homeowners association." "Not according to the state," I said, holding up a printed copy of the registry status. "Inactive, delinquent." Which means any enforcement action you've taken could be considered harassment. A ripple of gasps rolled across the room. Mark, sitting near the back, actually whistled. Karen turned red. "This is slander." "You can't." "It's public record," I said. "I emailed the documentation to the board earlier today. Naomi, my attorney, copied your treasurer and the county office." Ellen, who usually played Switzerland, glanced at her phone. "He's right," she said quietly. "I'm looking at the registry now. It says inactive." Karen's gavel hand trembled. "This is a clerical error," she shouted. "We'll fix it immediately." "Great," I said. "But until it's fixed, you have no authority to issue fines, mandate inspections, or modify policy." The room erupted into whispers. For the first time in years, Karen wasn't in control. I thought she might back down after that humiliation, but Karen's pride was titanium. The next morning, she retaliated by emailing the entire neighborhood claiming I'd illegally obtained private HOA data and endangered community integrity. It was pure nonsense, but it got traction among her loyal few. So I went public. I posted a calm, factual statement on the community Facebook group explaining the inactive filing, complete with screenshots of the registry. No name calling, no drama, just receipt. Within hours, the post blew up. Neighbors who'd been fined for trivial nonsense like mailbox paint or excessive mulch color variation started commenting, asking if they could demand refunds. By nightfall, the board called an emergency meeting without Karen. They voted to temporarily suspend her presidency until the filing was restored. When she found out, she stormed into my driveway yelling that I'd hijacked her authority. "Karen," I said, keeping my tone even, "the HOA isn't your kingdom. It's a group of volunteers managing landscaping fees." "You've destroyed order," she screamed. "People will start doing whatever they want. Maybe they'll start minding their own business," I said. That broke her. She jabbed her finger toward my camera on the porch. "You think this is over? I'll show everyone what kind of neighbor you really are." Then she stormed off, tires squealing as she left the cul-de-sac. For a few blissful days the neighborhood was quiet. People started mowing lawns at their own pace, painting mailboxes new colors, even hanging porch swings. It was peaceful until the county letter arrived. Apparently, Karen had filed a new complaint, this time accusing me of operating an unlicensed metalworking business from my property. She'd taken photos of my workshop, claiming the presence of welding equipment and industrial noise violated zoning laws. I almost admired her persistence. She'd turned spite into a full-time job. Luckily, I had an ace up my sleeve. Before the HOA drama, I'd registered my workshop as a home-based hobby under the local crafts exemption. Perfectly legal. When the zoning officer showed up, I offered him lemonade and a tour. He laughed after 5 minutes. "Looks like a hobby to me. Someone's wasting our time." I followed him outside and, right on cue, saw Karen watching from her window. He waved at her cheerfully, then drove off. 2 hours later, Sheriff Dalton called me. "Hey," he said, struggling not to laugh, "we just got another call from your HOA president. She's claiming your old gate has unauthorized police markings and is imitating law enforcement equipment." I snorted. "Dalton, it's your gate." "I know," he said. I told her that. Then she tried to demand its removal from county property. "And what did you say?" He chuckled. "Told her she's welcome to come take it off herself." Haven't heard back since. For a brief moment I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd give up. But then Naomi called. "You might want to sit down," she said. "Karen just filed an ethics complaint against the entire HOA board. She's claiming corruption, favoritism, and collusion with law enforcement. She listed you by name." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. "Please tell me you're joking." "I wish I was," Naomi said. "But this could actually work in your favor. The County Ethics Committee is required to hold a public hearing. If you're willing, we can make this very educational for everyone involved." "Educational how?" "By inviting the sheriff to testify." I grinned. Now that's poetic. Over the next 2 weeks, Naomi and I prepared a presentation for the county hearing. We gathered every document. Karen's fake violations, her illegal letters, her misuse of HOA stationery. Dalton agreed to appear, and when word spread that the sheriff would testify, half the neighborhood signed up to attend. The night before the hearing, I saw Karen outside again, pacing her lawn with her phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. Her voice carried faintly across the street. "They can't do this to me. I am the HOA." That's when it hit me. She wasn't just power-hungry. She genuinely believed the neighborhood couldn't function without her. The HOA wasn't a title to her, it was identity. And tomorrow that identity would collapse in front of everyone. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The county hearing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon in the old courthouse downtown, the kind of building where you can smell coffee, floor polish, and tension in the air. By the time I arrived, the parking lot was already half full. Apparently, word had spread fast. Half my neighborhood had come for the spectacle. Even Ellen brought popcorn in her purse. Inside, the small chamber buzzed with murmurs as people shuffled into rows of wooden benches. At the front sat 3 county ethics officers behind a long table, each wearing the expression of someone about to listen to far too much drama for too little pay. Karen sat across the room in her favorite white blazer, papers stacked like ammunition. When she saw me enter with Naomi and Sheriff Dalton, her jaw tightened so hard I could almost hear enamel crack. Naomi leaned toward me and whispered, "Just answer only what they ask. Be calm, factual, and let her hang herself." "Got it," I said. The lead officer, a woman named Ms. Pierce, tapped her pen. "This hearing concerns a complaint filed by Ms. Karen Langford, president of the Briar Ridge Homeowners Association, alleging misconduct and abuse of authority by certain members of her community and local law enforcement. Ms. Langford, you may begin." Karen rose like she was addressing the United Nations. "Thank you, Madam Chair. I represent the homeowners who have suffered under intimidation, favoritism, and unlawful collusion between Mr. Marcus Reed," she pointed at me dramatically, "and the county sheriff's department. Mr. Reed has misused public resources for personal vendettas and defamed this association through slanderous social media posts." The audience murmured. Naomi's pen didn't stop moving. Karen continued, her voice trembling with self-righteous conviction. "He installed an unauthorized industrial gate that violated neighborhood standards, then bribed the sheriff's office by donating it in exchange for protection and influence. Furthermore, he weaponized legal technicalities to discredit the HOA's authority, destabilizing the entire community." Ms. Pierce glanced at her notes. "And your evidence?" Karen lifted a binder the size of a phone book. Photographs, letters, timestamps, and witness statements. She began parading through them. Grainy photos of my old gate, copies of her own violation notices, even screenshots from Facebook. Her tone grew more desperate with each page. "This man made a mockery of our rules. He's turned our neighborhood into chaos. People are painting fences whatever color they please." The last sentence triggered chuckles from the crowd. Karen froze, realizing too late how ridiculous it sounded. Ms. Pierce looked unimpressed. "Do you have proof of bribery or misuse of public resources?" Karen hesitated. "The proof is circumstantial, but undeniable if you consider the pattern." Naomi whispered, "That's lawyer code for, I got nothing." When it was our turn, Dalton stepped forward first. In uniform, hat under his arm, calm as stone. "Sheriff John Dalton, ma'am. I can confirm the so-called industrial gate was voluntarily donated by Mr. Reed. It was inspected, accepted, and installed at our substation under standard donation procedure. There was no exchange of favor, benefit, or influence, unless you count us now having the nicest gate in the county." Laughter rippled across the benches. Even Ms. Pierce cracked a smile. Dalton continued, "Furthermore, the complainant, Ms. Langford, has called our dispatch 6 times in the past 2 months alleging fabricated crimes, illegal construction, impersonation of law enforcement, and what she described as psychological trespassing. None were substantiated." Karen shot up. "Because you refuse to investigate properly." Ms. Pierce held up her hand. "Ms. Langford, you will have your turn again." Dalton finished calmly, "Our department respects community organizations, but we don't enforce HOA drama. With all due respect, this complaint feels more like a personal vendetta than a matter of public ethics." The crowd erupted in applause before the chairwoman banged her gavel for silence. Next, Naomi presented a short slideshow, factual, devastating. She displayed the inactive HOA registration, the fabricated violation letters, and the laughably vague clauses Karen had cited. "What you have here, ladies and gentlemen," Naomi said smoothly, "is an individual abusing organizational power for personal control. She's issued threats, falsified documentation, and attempted to manipulate public offices, all while her association was legally inactive. My client has responded only with transparency and lawful procedure. Ms. Pierce leaned forward. Ms. Langford, how do you respond to these documents showing your HOA's delinquent registration? Karen stammered. That's a clerical oversight. It doesn't invalidate. Actually, Naomi interrupted, it does. Under state law, an inactive HOA cannot enforce bylaws or issue fines. Ms. Langford's correspondence, therefore, constitutes harassment. Karen's composure cracked. You're twisting everything. I was maintaining standards. Dalton muttered under his breath. If standards mean paranoia, she's doing great. That earned another wave of laughter. Karen slammed her binder shut and pointed at me. He's manipulating all of you. He's turning neighbors against each other. He's dangerous. Dangerous, I said quietly. For installing a gate? The lead officer tapped her pen again. Enough. We've heard sufficient testimony. We'll recess for 10 minutes. When the officers left the room, the atmosphere exploded. Neighbors buzzed, exchanging jokes. Someone whispered, "This is better than Netflix." Karen sat frozen, gripping her binder like a life raft. During the recess, Ellen approached me with a shy grin. Just so you know, the neighborhood voted this morning to hold a recall election for her position. Unofficially, everyone's done with her. I nodded. About time. When the committee reconvened, the verdict was brief and brutal. Ms. Pierce read from a prepared statement. After reviewing testimony and evidence, we find no misconduct by Mr. Reed or the Sheriff's Department. However, we find significant misuse of authority by Ms. Langford in her capacity as HOA President. We recommend suspension of all her activities pending review by the State Homeowners Bureau. Gasps filled the room. Karen stood abruptly, red-faced. You can't do this. I am the HOA. No, Miss Pierce said evenly. You were. Karen's voice cracked. This is harassment. This entire county is conspiring against me. Dalton folded his arms. Ma'am, please calm down. She turned on him. You think you're above the rules because you have a badge. Dalton didn't flinch. No, ma'am. I just follow the real ones. That line finished her. She gathered her papers, muttering curses under her breath, and stormed out. The heavy courthouse doors banged behind her like a closing chapter. Outside, the crowd spilled into the steps, laughing, chatting, relieved. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. Man, that was legendary. You destroyed her without even raising your voice. It wasn't me, I said. It was the truth. Ellen handed me a folded flyer. We're hosting a barbecue Sunday. Everyone wants to thank you for standing up to her. You coming? Wouldn't miss it, I said. But as I drove home that evening, a weird unease crept in. People like Karen don't just vanish, they regroup. Sure enough, when I pulled into my driveway, I noticed her house dark, curtains drawn, cars gone. She was lying low, and that worried me more than her shouting ever did. That weekend, the barbecue turned into a full-blown neighborhood celebration. Kids ran through sprinklers, music played, and everyone shared their Karen's stories. Someone brought a cake shaped like a gate with, "Thank you, Marcus," written in frosting. I couldn't help but laugh. Halfway through, Sheriff Dalton arrived, still in uniform, carrying a framed photo. "Thought you might like this," he said, handing it over. It was the gate, gleaming proudly in front of the sheriff's substation, with a plaque beneath. Donated by Marcus Reed, community contributor. The crowd cheered. But as the night wound down, Ellen approached again, face pale. "Marcus," she said quietly, "Karen's house, there's someone over there right now. A moving truck. But she's not moving out. They're unloading boxes." I frowned. "At night?" "Yeah. 2 men. I think she's back." Sure enough, when I looked across the street, Karen's porch lights flicked on. The silhouette in the window wasn't moving boxes. It was setting up office equipment. Her car pulled in minutes later, and even from across the street, I could see the glint of determination in her eyes. Dalton noticed my expression. "Something wrong?" I nodded toward her house. She's planning something. He sighed. You want me to check? Not yet, I said. Let's see what she does. The next morning, an email landed in everyone's inbox from a new sender, Briar Ridge Integrity Committee. It was Karen, reinvented. Her message declared that she was forming an independent homeowners alliance to restore order after the corrupt coup. She invited anyone concerned about declining neighborhood standards to her house for a meeting Monday night. Dalton read it over my shoulder. Well, he said dryly, at least she's consistent. I smiled grimly. Let her have her meeting. I'll bring the receipts. Because if Karen wanted a comeback tour, I was ready for the encore performance, one that would end her HOA empire once and for all. Karen's Integrity Committee launched like a failed startup, loud on promises, empty on planning, and doomed from the start. The Monday night meeting was supposed to be her triumphant return to power, but by the time I walked my dog past her house, it already looked like a low-budget cult gathering. She'd set up folding chairs on her driveway, a podium borrowed from the community center, and a banner that read, Restore Order to Briar Ridge. Around a dozen people sat awkwardly in the dark, sipping lemonade out of plastic cups while Karen lectured under a porch light. I lingered across the street, half hidden behind a tree, listening to her voice carry over the still air. They think they can silence me, she declared. They think because of some technicality, the HOA no longer exists. But we know the truth. This community needs structure, discipline, and leadership. Do you want chaos? A hesitant murmur of no followed. She slapped her binder. Then we take it back. One of the attendees, poor Dave, who couldn't say no to anyone, raised his hand timidly. But, Karen, the county said the HOA's suspended. Isn't this kinda illegal? Karen glared at him like he'd just committed blasphemy. We're not the HOA, she said sharply. We're an independent civic coalition. We don't need government approval to protect our neighborhood. The woman next to him whispered, So, we are the HOA, but like off the books? Karen snapped, We're better than the HOA. I almost laughed out loud. It was surreal, watching her rebrand dictatorship as a grassroots movement. But when she started talking about collecting voluntary contributions to fund community oversight operations, I realized this wasn't just delusion. It was fraud waiting to happen. I pulled out my phone, zoomed in, and snapped a few photos. Banner, podium, donation box. Then I texted Naomi. She's doing it again. Calling herself the Integrity Committee. Might be violating nonprofit laws. Naomi replied instantly. Record everything. We'll take it to the state compliance office. By the next morning, Karen's propaganda machine was in full swing. Flyers appeared in mailboxes accusing me, Dalton, and the current board of destroying neighborhood traditions. Her email blasts multiplied, now boasting that her committee would inspect yards for maintenance standards. It was déjà vu, the same control dressed in a new acronym. But she made one fatal mistake. On Wednesday, she sent a membership invoice for $75 to every household, claiming it was a voluntary contribution due immediately to maintain neighborhood safety. That single word, invoice, turned her grift into mail fraud. Naomi's eyes lit up when I forwarded it to her. She's cooked, she said. We'll file a complaint with the state attorney's office and the Postal Inspection Service. They love this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, the neighborhood erupted again. Ellen marched up to my porch holding her invoice like it was radioactive. Marcus, she's trying to charge me for grass monitoring. You're not the only one, I said. Don't pay her a dime. We're about to put this circus out of business. Karen, oblivious to the growing backlash, doubled down. By Friday she'd parked herself at the end of the cul-de-sac with a folding table labeled Integrity Information Booth. She wore sunglasses and a sun hat, handing out pamphlets while pretending to ignore the side-eye from passing cars. I watched from my porch with my coffee, amused. You've got to admire the dedication, I told Lena. She's running a one-woman government with 0 subjects. Lena smirked. More like a failed monarchy. Should we call her Queen Chaos? But by evening, Chaos wasn't funny anymore. Karen had gone live on Facebook. Her stream title, Exposing the Corruption in Briar Ridge. The video showed her pacing in front of my house, phone shaking slightly as she narrated. "This is where it all began," she said dramatically, pointing at my driveway. "This man colluded with law enforcement to undermine democracy in our community. They stole your voice." Comments poured in, some mocking, others egging her on. But then she crossed the line. She flipped the camera toward my security sign and read my address aloud. "If you believe in accountability, come here tomorrow morning. We'll show them the people won't be silenced." Lena's jaw dropped. "She just doxed you. On Facebook." I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. That wasn't neighborhood drama anymore, it was harassment. Within 10 minutes, I was on the phone with Dalton. He didn't even let me finish. "Already saw it," he said. "We've got 3 reports about her livestream. I'm sending a unit tonight to give her a warning for trespassing and harassment." True to his word, 2 patrol cars rolled up after sunset. From my window, I saw the flashing blue lights reflect off Karen's perfect white SUV. The officers spoke with her for 10 minutes. She tried gesturing wildly, pointing at my house like she was explaining an alien invasion, but eventually one officer handed her a yellow citation slip. She stood frozen, then tore it in half dramatically, right before they handed her another one. By morning, the Facebook video was gone, replaced by a long post claiming she'd been illegally censored by county enforcers. She insisted her movement was growing and that patriotic homeowners should rally in her yard that evening. That was her final mistake. Dalton called me again around noon. "Marcus, the county prosecutor's office is getting involved. Your attorney's complaint matched others from different neighborhoods. Turns out she's been emailing HOA boards countywide offering to consult for a fee." "You're kidding." "Nope," he said. "She's been running a side hustle as a self-proclaimed neighborhood governance expert. We've got 5 statements already." "Let me guess," I said. "All equally miserable." He chuckled. "You guessed it. County's issuing a cease and desist order today. If she ignores it, it escalates to fraud charges." That evening, I didn't need to peek out the window. The commotion made sure of it. Karen had gathered about 8 diehards on her lawn waving homemade, restore order signs. But halfway through her speech, 2 unmarked county vehicles pulled up. A man in a gray suit stepped out, followed by Dalton and another deputy. I couldn't hear the conversation, but the body language said it all. The man in the suit handed her an envelope and spoke calmly while Dalton stood by. Karen's face cycled through confusion, denial, then outrage. She threw her hands up, shouting, "You can't silence integrity!" before storming inside and slamming the door so hard her sign toppled over. Dalton texted me 10 minutes later, "Served. Cease and desist delivered. She's officially barred from collecting funds or representing the HOA in any capacity." I finally exhaled, realizing it was over, or at least, the storm had broken. The next morning, the Integrity Committee banner vanished from her yard. A for sale sign appeared 2 days later. She didn't even bother with subtlety. She wanted out fast. Rumor had it, she was moving to a community with stricter standards. When her moving truck finally rolled out, the whole cul-de-sac gathered quietly on the sidewalk. Nobody cheered, not because we didn't want to, but because we didn't need to. Her silence was victory enough. Ellen walked over holding a small cardboard box. "Found this in the community mailbox," she said. "Karen's old HOA stationery. Thought you might like a souvenir." I took it, laughing. Inside was a single unused violation notice, still crisp, still smelling faintly of printer ink and misplaced power. "Perfect," I said. "I'll frame it." By that evening, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the street gold. For the first time in months, Briar Ridge felt peaceful, No flyers, no arguments, no tape measures waving in the air. Just normal life. Dalton stopped by one last time, pulling into the driveway with that easy grin of his. "Heard she's officially gone," he said. "County flagged her from registering another HOA anywhere for at least 5 years. Guess we can all sleep with our garage doors open now," I joked. He laughed. "Maybe not. But at least without someone measuring the color of the hinges." We clinked coffee mugs in quiet celebration. As the sky turned orange and pink, I thought back to the chaos of the past few months. The violations, the hearings, the sheer absurdity of it all. It started with a gate, one harmless, practical gate, and ended with a woman dismantled by her own obsession with control. People like Karen always think they're defending order, but really, they just can't handle not being in charge. Later that night, I logged onto the community Facebook group. Someone had posted a meme, Karen's empty driveway, with the caption, "Integrity has left the chat." The comments were full of laughing emojis and relieved neighbors sharing stories about repainting fences, hanging lights, planting flowers, all the small freedoms she used to police. For the first time in a long while, our neighborhood actually felt like a community. Not perfect, not controlled, just human. And that, I figured, was the best revenge of all. 2 weeks after Karen's moving truck disappeared around the corner, Briar Ridge felt like a different world. The constant anxiety that used to hang over the neighborhood, like static before a thunderstorm, was gone. Kids played basketball in driveways again. People left their trash cans out overnight without fear of citations. Even Dave, the HOA's eternal fence-sitter, started smiling when he waved. It was as if everyone had collectively exhaled for the first time in years. But the peace didn't come instantly. Her absence felt strange at first, like the quiet after a long argument. I'd catch myself expecting to find another envelope taped to my mailbox or an angry voicemail about property uniformity. Instead, there was nothing but the sound of sprinklers and laughter echoing from down the street. Lena said it best one evening as we watched the sunset from our porch. "It's weird," she said. "It's like when the power goes out and you realize how much noise the fridge was making." I nodded. Exactly. She was the fridge of this neighborhood, always humming, always cold. We both laughed until our sides hurt. The new interim HOA board, now led by Ellen, was trying something radical, being reasonable. They sent out an email titled, "Let's Keep It Simple," outlining a few basic community priorities. Trash pickup, lighting repairs, and scheduling a fall picnic. No new fines, no surveillance, no drama. People couldn't believe it. It was like rediscovering democracy after a dictatorship. Then, about a month later, something unexpected arrived in the mail. A large manila envelope with the sheriff's department seal and my name on it. For a split second, I wondered if Karen had somehow risen from the ashes with one last complaint. But inside was a letter on official letterhead, signed by Sheriff Dalton himself. "Marcus," it began, "on behalf of the department, we'd like to formally thank you for your support in promoting community cooperation. Enclosed, please find an honorary certificate of civic contribution, and a little something extra we thought you'd appreciate." I reached inside and pulled out a framed photograph. It was the gate, my gate, shining under the station lights with a new metal plaque welded to the base. It read, "The Reed Barrier, a symbol of community integrity." I couldn't help but laugh. The irony was too perfect. Karen had spent months trying to erase that gate from existence, and now it was literally immortalized in steel with the word integrity carved into it. That weekend, Dalton stopped by in person, parking his cruiser out front. "Had to deliver it myself," he said, holding up a second small box. "From the guys at the station." Inside was a miniature replica of the gate, custom-made, detailed right down to the keypad. The tag on the base read, "Property of Marcus Reed, Defender of Sanity." I grinned. "You realize this is going on my porch, right?" "Good," he said. "Maybe it'll ward off the next HOA tyrant." It became a running joke in Briar Ridge. Every time someone mentioned neighborhood rules, someone else would say, "Careful, or Marcus will donate another gate." But beneath the laughter, I knew we'd all learned something. Karen's downfall hadn't just been about rules or boundaries, it was about control. She believed that order meant domination, that community meant obedience. What she never understood was that people don't follow rules because they're scared, they follow them because they make sense. The fall picnic became the symbol of that new spirit. Ellen organized it on the cul-de-sac, with long folding tables and a grill borrowed from the church. No sign-up sheets, no inspection forms, no mandatory contributions. Just everyone showing up with food, music, and smiles. I arrived with Lena carrying a cooler of lemonade. The smell of barbecue filled the air. Kids raced around with chalk, drawing hopscotch patterns across the same pavement Karen once called visually disruptive. Ellen greeted me with a hug. "We couldn't have done this without you," she said. "You reminded everyone that standing up for yourself isn't being difficult, it's being fair." I shook my head. I didn't do it alone. Karen's ego did half the work. Dalton joined us later, still in uniform, joking that he was on official burger duty. Someone handed him a spatula, and he flipped patties like he'd been born for it. Every so often, someone would come up to thank him for dealing with the HOA crisis. He'd smile and say, "All in a day's work." Midway through the evening, a moving van rolled slowly past the street. Conversation quieted for a moment until the driver turned and we saw the logo, Langford Relocation Services. For one ridiculous second, everyone thought Karen was back. Then the van kept driving. "False alarm," Mark muttered, holding up his drink. "The ghost of the HOA has left the building." The laughter that followed was cathartic, loud, genuine, shared. We'd spent months under constant scrutiny, and now we could finally breathe without someone measuring the height of our joy. As twilight settled, Ellen raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said. "And to leaving nonsense behind." Everyone cheered. Even Dave, who used to nod in terrified silence at every meeting, shouted, "And no more compliance reports." Later that night, when most people had gone home and the lanterns were flickering low, Dalton and I sat on the tailgate of his truck sipping cold lemonade. The air was soft and quiet except for crickets and a distant dog barking. "You know," he said, "I get a lot of calls about neighborhood disputes. Usually it's noise, dogs, fences. But I've never seen one end like this." "How do they usually end?" I asked. "Someone moves. Or someone gets arrested." He smirked. "You pulled off something rarer. You made people cooperate." "I didn't plan it," I said. "I just didn't like being pushed around." He shrugged. "That's leadership, whether you wanted it or not." We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the last of the lights go out along the street. Then Dalton added, "Oh, and just so you know, your old gate's become a bit of a tourist spot. Deputies keep taking pictures with it. One guy even called it the Wall of Calm." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my drink. The Wall of Calm? That's incredible. A few days later, I drove out to the sheriff's substation to see it for myself. Sure enough, there it stood, gleaming black iron, standing tall against the afternoon sun, solid and quiet. A few flowers had been planted nearby, and someone had hung a small American flag from the post. I stood there for a moment, tracing my hand along the cold metal, remembering every argument, every letter, every absurd accusation that had led here. It wasn't just a gate anymore. It was proof that standing your ground, even against something as petty as an HOA, can mean something bigger. When I got home, I found Lena sitting on the porch, scrolling through her phone. "You're going to love this," she said, grinning. She handed me the screen. It was a listing on a real estate site, Karen's new address. The photo showed a pristine house behind a massive wrought iron gate. I stared for a long second before bursting out laughing. She built another one. Lena wiped tears from her eyes. Guess she finally understands security gates after all. Or maybe, I said, She just needed to be the one holding the remote. 4 days afterward, that image stuck with me, the irony of Karen living behind the very thing she'd tried to ban. It was poetic justice at its finest. As winter approached, Briar Ridge thrived. The new HOA bylaws were rewritten into 3 short paragraphs, focusing on basic maintenance, safety, and neighborly respect. No one missed the long lists of infractions. People repainted fences whatever color they wanted. Mark even built a small wooden gate at the end of his garden just to honor the saga. He hung a tiny sign on it that read, "Authorized by common sense." I couldn't have said it better. Sometimes I still glance across the street where Karen used to live. The new family there has 2 kids and a golden retriever that barks at everything. Their porch lights are mismatched, their lawn sometimes uneven, but they wave every morning. And every time I see them, I think, this is what a neighborhood is supposed to be. It's messy. It's loud. It's alive. And it doesn't need a self-appointed queen to run it.